Thank you everyone for joining us for this session, Take Control of Your Cloud Costs. This is part of a series we will be hosting on optimizing your Azure environment. We have a lot of exciting tips and tricks for you today, but first I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, we'll aim to run about 60 minutes today. This webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording and the slides after the event. And you are in listen-only mode, but I do encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A as we go, and we will try to get to some of them at the end. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First off, my name is Stephanie Hamrick. I'm a marketing manager at Dataprise, and I'll be your moderator for today. And joining us as our expert on the line is Brandon Stuart, who is a senior enterprise architect for Dataprise and associate general manager for our Mountain region. We also have one of our Azure engineers, Kevin Vieira, on the line in the background here to answer any questions as we go. So feel free to take advantage of that Q&A section and send in any of those questions as we go along. So a little bit more about Brandon and why he's the perfect expert for this session. First, he is a certified Azure Solutions Architect expert, and that's not where the certifications stop. He has more than 25 Microsoft certifications, and I believe a big majority of those are Azure-specific certifications. Brandon also has more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry, all of which makes him such a valuable resource for us to have here today. Brandon, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And next, I'll tell you very quickly about Dataprise for those who don't know us, and then we'll get right into it. So Dataprise is a national managed services provider. We have been providing services end-to-end for our clients across the United States since 1995. We believe technology should enable you to be the best at what you do. So we deliver best-in-class managed help desk, cybersecurity, network, infrastructure, collaboration, end user, all the things to help you get there. We're also a Microsoft Cloud Solutions partner with advanced specializations in Azure, and we have tons of experience in this space helping architect and optimize our customers' cloud environments. So now let me share a little bit about what is in store. Brandon has put together for us today 10 tips, tricks, and strategies you can employ to take control of your costs in Azure. And then we'll wrap up with our Q&A if we have some free time at the end. So with that, we are going to move right into our first strategy, which is going to be using Azure reservations. Brandon, do you want to tell us more about these?
Perfect. I would love to. Thank you for the warm welcome, Stephanie. So these are, although this is number one, these are in no particular order. This isn't like number one, the highest cost savings is not going to be my favorite either. Technically, my favorite I saved for last just to keep everybody, that's how I hook you. I keep you in. So the last one's my favorite. The rest of them, some of these dovetail into each other. That's why I thought maybe this order, but again, no true priority or precedence here. Azure reservations. What is a reservation? A reservation is a commitment towards Microsoft, to Microsoft, for 1 or 3 years. In return for that commitment, Microsoft gives us a discount. We'll see on the right-hand side there, the save up to 80%. Place mark that 80% in your brain. We'll talk about that in just a second. What I want to focus on is the second number there down below, the 72%. That is over the actual reservation. To get the 80%, we have to stack on what's called the hybrid benefit, but we're going to talk about that in a second. The reservations, many eligible services. In the next slide, we have a whole list of them. But before we get there, a couple tips and tricks. There's a lot of stuff within reservations. We could take a whole webinar just on that, but a couple things that I think are the most important and buried deep into Microsoft's documentation is the ability to exchange. The commitment sounds scary, especially with a large company like Microsoft, but it's not. We have the ability to exchange these reservations. We also have the ability to refund reservations up to $50,000 in a 12-month rolling period. So again, even though it might sound daunting, it is not. We have a lot of flexibility with these and a lot of, not loopholes, but just ways to work around some of the limitations. And then next slide, please, Stephanie. With these, so here's the full list of the reservation of potential services that can apply for reservations. And you notice there's a lot of things in here that are not Microsoft. So there's Red Hat, there's OpenAI, there's NetApp. So keep these in mind, even if you're not using them today, just knowing that we have the ability to lock in reservations for more than just virtual machines, which is a common misconception. And that's my number one, Steph.
Awesome. And on to our second strategy here, utilizing Azure Hybrid benefit. Brandon, how can this help us save money in Azure?
So this is that 80% that I was talking about in the previous slide. This is how we achieve additional savings. So we've locked in the reservation. Now maybe in addition to, or standalone, does not have to be in addition to, is hybrid benefit, also known as Azure Hybrid Use Benefit, AHB or AHUB. If you see those, all the same thing. Documentation just reads a little different some places. So what is this? This is a mechanism that allows us to take our qualifying on-prem licensing and use it in Azure. The keyword there is qualifying. It has to have software assurance or active subscription. On the Windows side, it's a server subscription. So there's a couple ways to utilize these. Now you might be thinking, I don't have those. I never had any on-prem. This is a net new greenfield deployment in Azure. That's okay. You could still use this. You just have to purchase the licensing outside of Azure with software assurance, right? That's that key, or active subscription, and bring it to Azure. It can often be a cost savings. It's an extra step, but it can be a cost savings. We just did this a couple weeks ago for a client. It was cheaper for them to purchase a SQL outright with software assurance and then enable the benefit in Azure compared to running it hourly in Azure. The calculator that we see here on the right-hand side, there's also a link down below. We'll get this to you. Stephanie will get all this stuff to you at the end of the webinar. But the link will send you to this calculator. It's nice to do these quick takeoffs to see, is it truly cheaper buying it outright, or based on the service, the SKU, and the region I'm looking to lease, is it maybe cheaper just to go in Azure? So this calculator will help us figure those out. You see the different tabs up there. It's not just for Windows Server and SQL's run or virtual machines running SQL. It can be for other flavors and variants of SQL, and those are listed up there. So highly encourage you to use a calculator, look at the cost savings, and see if it makes sense for you to purchase that software outside of Azure. And then in the next slide, thank you, this just shows, this is from Microsoft, so it's direct from Microsoft. This is depicting the savings that you might have over, this example is SQL Enterprise Edition. So we're going from $3.92, 97 cents an hour down to 59 cents an hour. So great savings, 85% savings. Now, I don't want to get this confused with that just free money. You had to have purchased the licensing before, but maybe that was in 2023, 24 that you renewed it, and now it's 25. So we're talking about 2025 budget. But nonetheless, we still have to purchase that licensing. And then in the next slide, we have the Windows Server savings. So 50% savings on the Windows Server side of the house. Great savings. I highly recommend just taking a look at it, entertaining it. If it works for your setup, lock it in. And that's my number two.
Awesome. So strategy number 3 is going to be using Azure Savings Plan. Brandon, what is this? How does it work?
Yeah, so Azure Savings Plan is relatively new. We didn't have this for the longest time, which made our options a little more limited. Savings plan, think of it as an umbrella. It's our savings plan umbrella for all things compute, many things compute, that didn't qualify for our reservations, our reserved instances for some reason. Maybe it just too dynamic, right? So, and let's think of a reservation as this. A reservation is a certain SKU in a certain region, right? I'm oversimplifying, but for this instance, that locks us in where a savings plan really doesn't. We have a whole lot more flexibility. You'll notice in the map on the right, that savings plan's at the top. Maybe it's a subscription level savings plan that goes down to all of your compute resources. So what we do there is the same thought process. It is still a commit. It's an hourly commit to Microsoft, again, for that 1 or 3 year term, and it will help us reduce costs by 65%. So if you remember from that top tip, 72% savings on a reservation, 65% savings For Azure Savings Plan, a little less savings, but more flexibility. Because again, we're over the entire globe, over all 7 of these services. These are service verticals, not just one thing. And I know they're probably kind of small to see, but they're down below there. I think it's important to note, because common misconceptions is that a savings plan is for everything. It's not for everything. It's for everything compute that is supported, which is this list. And then another misconception is that savings plan is just for virtual machines. Also false. So this is the official map from Microsoft. So where does it work best? Those dynamic and evolving workloads we find work best. And then yeah, perfect. Good. Sorry, I was on a bit of a delay there. This helps us understand how these work. So in the chart on the right, we look at our hourly amount. That's that green bar. That's our Azure Savings Plan. And it goes by hour, these bars. So the first hour, that is our plan price. That is what we've committed to use in Azure. And we hit our threshold. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. The next hour, not so much. We dipped down a little bit, but we still have to pay. We still have to pay for that hourly commit because we've committed, but we're not using it. So we're paying for things we're not using. That third hour, we've peaked. We've peaked above it. And now we're paying pay-as-you-go prices. So don't worry, things aren't going to be shut down. You're not going to have angry people with pitchforks at your door. This is simply the same price that you're probably paying right now. So the Azure Savings Plan, as you can kind of see as it goes up and down, I think my biggest guidance around this is to make sure that we are locking in a savings plan as close as we possibly can. And based on this chart, this is pretty close. Even if we are a little under, a little over, that's okay. It's still a whole lot more savings than what we had. So imperative to calculate with accuracy. And I think my biggest recommendation on this, if we try to double dip, as I say, the savings plan and the reservations, make sure you pull your calculations for the reservations out of your Azure Savings Plan. I can't stress it enough. We've seen it so many times where clients will do the math and it's combined, and now you're paying for a lot that you're not using. So separate them, but use them both. They both have great purposes.
Mhm.
And that's my
And right on to tip number 4 here, right sizing your infrastructure, which is probably easier said than done, Brandon. Do you want to talk about how our customers can do this?
It is. This is a trick, but it's fun. You kind of put on your investigator hat. You get to go diving deep and trying to figure out what are these resources actually doing? What are the resources that they need to get that accomplished? So the title is Right Size Your Infrastructure. I want to stress that it's the entire infrastructure. Though my examples here are virtual machines, it's the entire infrastructure that we want to make sure we're right sizing. Even when it comes to free things in Azure, we always recommend, and cloud frameworks recommend the same thing, right size it. Make sure you build so you can expand, but right size it. Now, specific to cost, if we look at my example here, the CPU, 2%. You see it just waving around there. For the past 30 days at 2%, I could absolutely bring this one back down, and I should. I should right size this server. But this is the full picture, right? These are the built-in metrics that we get in Azure so we can see what the resource is using. Again, not the full picture. We have much deeper insights and analytics and other metrics that we can build out to better understand, well, maybe it's RAM that I need. Maybe it's IOPS, maybe it's throughput. Who knows? There's a lot of things that certain virtual machines and workloads need. And this is just one step of many to figure those out. But nonetheless, it is essential that we do figure this out. So then bottom right note there, after right sizing, lock in your reservations, right? So we right size the environment. Now we're running on a SKU that's, I don't know, 70% cheaper. We lock in a reservation that's 60% cheaper on that SKU itself. So, and then we put the Azure hybrid use benefit on top of that. And we're just stacking on these crazy couponlady.com type stacking on. It's a lot of savings. There's savings all over in Azure. We just have to know where to look for them and be smart about it, because just like I showed in the previous one, if we're not smart about it, we can end up paying more. And a couple other recommendations on this one, just common ones that we see. SQL. We often see SQL over provisioned in the environment. So using the telemetry, those insights to bring that down or to share, maybe we switch, maybe we go to like an elastic pool. If it's one database, that's constantly the issue, or maybe we separate it completely. But just identifying the issue is step one. And then we drop it down a tier, save a little bit there. Or maybe we entertain the free tier. There's a SQL free tier. We'll talk about some of the free stuff in a little bit, but those things help a lot. Now, maybe this is a production environment, you don't want to mess with it because you don't want your product owners to come at you and be incredibly angry just because you wanted to save some money. Maybe we're talking about this in the development side of the house. We often have clients that will have their prod and their dev exactly the same, but that dev is only used maybe once a month to push new commits and they want to test. Well, let's size it accordingly, or maybe bring it down when it's not being used and then bring it back up when it is. So a lot of room for movement there. Same thing, I think another common offender would be app service plans, the ASPs. We often see an app service plan, top level, right? And then a website. So app service plan one, website one. App service plan two, website two. What if we took all 10 of those websites and put it in the same app service plan? Now we're using the power of platform as a service sharing resources. Or again, maybe we drop it down a tier, down to I don't know, standard, basic, whatever meets the needs of the requirements. So or the free, right? Keep knocking on that free tier because it's great and it works well if it meets your requirements. So a lot of things to think about when we're right sizing the infrastructure. So many different services, so many different ways to get it. But that is my number 4. I think we're on 4.
Yeah. And talking about free stuff for tip number
Oh,
5, right in line here, let's talk about something fun and free, Azure free services. I did not know these existed. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty long list. Brandon, do you want to talk about what these are?
yes, I love to. Thank you. Yeah, and this is right in line. So the Azure Free Services, or what I call sometimes the Azure Forever Free, it depends on the service. But this is an entire list. This isn't the entire list. Stephanie will be so kind to send this out to us later today. But this is a screenshot, alphabetical order, just starting at the top. Some services focus your attention on the far right hand, the two columns on the right, the amount and duration. So the amount sometimes is unlimited. We can run this service as many times and as often as we would like. Some of them have transaction limits. Some of them have IOPS limits, DTUs, ADUs, all sorts of different restrictions based on the service. Once you've met that, then you are on a billing tier, potentially. The period is the duration that these are free. So you'll notice that a lot of these are always, some of them are 12 months. There's different terms for different services. And I think we have like 70 free services now or something like that. It's a lot. There's quite a bit. But I recommend to look at this entire list, even if you're not using them today or you don't plan to use them tomorrow, kind of catalog that in the back of your mind. Because you never know when you're sitting at a table and one of your developers says, I really want to do Azure custom vision or some service out there. And you remember that you have 10,000 predictions for free for 12 months. And you tell him that. And they go off and now you've got an engagement running for free, a proof of concept. So great to know about the free services. In addition to these services on this list, you also get $200 free with any new account and $100 free for students, and then you get a $50 to $150 free per month with Visual Studio. So I think that's really important because that's per month. That's not just a one time, and those are fantastic. I encourage you not to use them for production use. Ultimately, it is your decision, but our guidance is to use those for dev, tests, learning, education, all of that. But great to know.
Awesome. And as Brandon mentioned, we will be sending out a link with a list of all of these services. It's 4 pages long. This list goes on and on. There's a ton of stuff in there for you to discover. So keep an eye out for that. We will be sending that link in the follow-up email for this session. And with that, let's move on to our 6th strategy here, the Azure Pricing Calculator. Brandon, what are your recommendations here?
Yeah, so this one, the rest of them have been really around direct cost savings. This one's a more indirect cost savings, but nonetheless, I find it very valuable and beneficial. I'm in this every single day. So, couple things, and the reason why I think it is before we deploy services, I think it's really important that we know what it's going to cost, or as close as we can get. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of that pricing calculator. This is Microsoft, this is a public pricing calculator. Links on the left-hand side here. You'll notice in that picture, there's a login button. Pro tip number 1, log in. Log in and save your quotes, because what we find happens is that we'll walk a client through on how to quote something. and then they'll save it, or they won't save it, and then they have to get in and rebuild it again. So if we get in there and we save these, let's say it's HR Application Initiative 2025, you save it in there, you export it to CSV, you can share it with the team, and then they might come back and say, well, we need 2 servers, or we need to change all of this stuff. That's fine as long as you saved it. You jump back in here, you log in, you refresh an old quote, and then you say duplicate. Maybe they need a whole DR scenario built out. So you duplicate that quote. Now you have both of them. So it streamlines it. That's pro tip number 1. Number 2 is this is a very in-depth calculator for some services. Some things might be completely foreign. So what we recommend is capture as much information from the requester, whether that's a vendor or an internal development team. Capture as much as you possibly can from them, and then put it into the calculator. Be as close as you possibly can on answering and populating all fields. Things like your region, right? What region are you planning to deploy to, or that you're currently in? All of the SKUs and everything else will tie back to some of those requirements, but then down below might not. Some of these things, again, might be completely foreign. Some of your transaction costs, your IOPS, some of the throughput, all of these things, you might not know how to answer. I recommend just keeping the defaults. Unless you can answer them, keep them default. Don't guess. A lot of them are pre-populated for good reason. A lot of them also populated up to the free tier. So you're not paying for anything. You'll see free line items, but at least you're populating something in that field. So I think those would be a couple of my tips there. This is the pricing calculator. Second link is the total cost of ownership calculator. So the TCO, a little bit different calculator, a little bit different thought process, but both fantastic calculators. And I recommend using those so we can better understand what it could potentially cost us to deploy something, or if we're right sizing our environment and we can't get the prices in the Azure portal, come here to understand what we will have, what that price might be before we deploy.
Awesome. And strategy number 7 here, using Azure Spot.
Yeah,
Brandon,
I
tell
love.
us a bit about this one.
Yeah, you bet. So I love Azure Spot. I don't feel like enough people know about it. So Azure Spot is, let me put it to you this way. So Microsoft, for the most part, will put a price on a certain service, a resource, a SKU in a certain region. And we pay it, all right? We pay it unless we've locked in some pricing. We effectively pay it. Azure Spot, we flip the script a little bit. Now we tell Microsoft the price we want to pay. And you might be thinking, well, that's got to be too good to be true. There must be a catch, and there is. There is a catch. There's an eviction rate, a possibility of evicted resources, evicted servers here. So what I've done, which sounds really scary, I'm not trying to scare you. This is the language from Microsoft. I'll walk you through it and help you better understand how it can be a little less daunting and still utilized. But I want to stress that this is better suited for those interruptible workloads like batch jobs, testing, just non-critical tasks. But we do have clients that use this. Let's say that their production stack is two servers that are not running on Spot, dedicated servers that are going to be up. And then the rest of them are running Azure Spot because they don't care if some of these get evicted. And what happens when they get evicted can be one of two things. Either gets deallocated or shut down or deleted. Choice is ours, which is nice. So what we see is if we have a whole pool full of Spot instances, and I think this will make more sense when I get to the numbers and talk about this graphic, but the amount of cost savings we get on a Spot instance just makes sense to have more, if we can, if our application supports it, have more of these resources to pull from when they are live. So let me talk about some of the numbers here. On the right-hand side, you'll see this is real world. This isn't from Microsoft. This is in my demo lab. I've got what is it of D2AS V4, I think, in there. It's tiny, so I can't hardly read it, but it's a very common virtual machine SKU. On the right-hand side of that, I've said time span of 3 months. What that's doing is it's going back 3 months and looking at that eviction rate for a certain price, which for this region that's highlighted, so down below the West US 2 squared in blue there, that one has an eviction rate of 0 to 5%. Right, very low. And then West Central US, the orange to the right of that, is 10 to 15. West US to the right of that, 15 to 20. So it depends on what the resource is and where it is, if Microsoft's extra available capacity will help us choose, make an educated decision at very least. So what I've done here in the very bottom is I've put in 0.013. So effectively a penny an hour. This virtual machine is usually 18 cents an hour. So what does that equate to? The savings is 92.8% savings for this virtual machine that Microsoft will accept. If they won't accept it, it's going to error out. It'll be red down here. And they'll tell you their lowest price there too. But what we've done is we've taken this very common, a D series VM is a general purpose VM. We've taken this very common general purpose VM that's $137 a month to $9.81. So you think about that, it's massive savings. We can have more of them, and they can just run and then be shut down if not needed. We can fire them back up when we do need them, or whenever it makes sense. But this one's cool. This one's a lot of fun. That's
That's quite a bit of savings there.
that's a lot of savings.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to strategy number 8, using auto shutdown and scheduled power off. Brandon, back over to you.
Yeah, this one will be quick. It's more the idea that I want to embed. So this is what we're looking at is auto shutdown. This is a native feature within a virtual machine on your first blade there on the left, under operations, under auto shutdown. We have very few options on the right-hand side. We enable it, we set a time zone, and do we want notifications? We click save and it's done. And this is great. I recommend this, especially for anything that just doesn't need to be up 24/7. What we see when we start doing these auto shutdowns is when we do the math, we have our hours in a month, which is on average 730. That's what Microsoft on average bills. Different months, extra days in a month, right? But on average, 730. The that is vastly different than our working hours and our production hours. So our working hours, say that 9 to 5, right? But then our working hours, our actual production, when we need certain resources, we can often take it from 730 hours a month, which would be that consistent billing. We take no action, down to about 220 hours a month, those working hours. So it works really, really well. You think about the cost savings when we're billed hourly, so that's also major savings. Now, what I'm showing here is just the native shutdown, doesn't power things back up. So when I talk about the idea here is to build from this. Do this on resources you don't need very often and then go in and manually power them back up when you do. But then take this idea further and start to look into auto scaling or scaling out, maybe even scaling up. Right? There's a lot of different mechanisms that we can use within Azure to do these things for us based off of time of day, based off of metric, utilizations. Those kind of things can save a lot of money when we don't just have all of these resources up and idle for no reason. So that one really helps. My big word of caution here, and I'm only going to mention this because this has happened a couple times in the past few months. There must be some recent blog article or Reddit or some kind of forum somewhere that is pushing people to an automated script to uh, power on and power off virtual machines. And it does just that. It works great at the guest operating system layer. The reason why that's important is because we don't save when we shut down through the guest operating system layer. We have to send the command back to the Azure management plane layer to notify billing to stop billing. Otherwise, we won't. The virtual machine is going to be shut down and you're going to be billed. So very important that we don't use that script, that whatever we do, make sure, and this screenshot does exactly what I'm talking about, sends the command back to the management plane layer. It stops and deallocates the virtual machine. That is the important tip, and that's my number 8.
Awesome. And our second to last tip for the day, using Azure Cost Management. Brandon, I believe you'd like to show us how to accomplish some of your top most helpful tasks in here and some pitfalls to avoid.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So um, this is important because we got some war stories here. And I'll just be high level here, and I will not mention client names, but we've had help desk individuals as innocent as could be deploy $27,000 a month VMs to Azure, and they are not caught until about 6 weeks down the road because we're not notified. We don't know that they're deployed until we get the bill, and often the bill goes to finance or accounting, and And then it takes weeks to come back to us to understand why has this gone up so much. So, or sometimes they just pay it, they don't even know. So setting alerts here, first step, and there's a lot of different alerts we can set, but these a couple that I recommend. So again, native to Azure, cost management, our cost alerts, we add an alert. The alert type is anomaly. We want to look for anything that is unusual within the environment. When it happens, you will get an email. Very basic email, but it has everything we need. Has a resource name, what it's grown by, what it's predicted to continue to grow by. So when you get these emails and it says, I don't know, this virtual machine or this resource group is 2%, 8% over what it usually grows by based on previous months, quarters, then we can say, that's no big deal. They told me this was coming. I knew it was coming. But what about we get the email that says it's 127,000% over, which was exactly what happened to one of our other clients that had OpenAI. They were using some of the cognitive services in Azure, and they turned it over to another team to play with and test as well. We didn't have boundaries set, didn't have alerting set, and they got a $133,000 bill from Microsoft. I mean, that's huge. So knowing about these things the day or two that it's happening, we can course correct. We can get in the environment. We can try to figure out why it happened, or maybe it happens, and that's okay. But it's going to go back down. That was a one-time thing. Getting notified is the most important part. Next slide, please, Steph. Budgets. Another great one. I recommend put a budget out there so we know when we near a budget. So this is an actual budget that I was building out in the test lab so you can see it. Actual, the type is actual, the percent of budget is 50%, and that amount is $100. This is also in one of those MSDN subscriptions, those free subscriptions I was talking about. So I want to know when I'm nearing that because I don't want to not have the last 3 weeks of my subscription not usable. Forecasted budget 100% and the amount is 200. And Steph, if you go to the next screen, I think it makes it a little easier to see. So this is that same budget. Previous screen was how we configure it. This is how we're utilizing it. You'll see in January, uh, the that was my total. That's what I used. And then in February, the dark green is what I'm referring to. That dark green is what I currently used up until just a couple days ago. My forecast is in the light green. You'll see that it's going to exceed half my budget, but it's not going to exceed the entire budget. Now, what about March? March, if I continue to grow at the rate that I am, all my resources deployed the way that they are, I will have issues. And because this is one of those MSDN subscriptions, it will shut down. It will shut down mid-month. So I need to go in there and take action on this. But had I not set this up, I would have had no idea. So these are really incredible to do. They're fast and simple to deploy, and they will, I promise you, at some point, more than likely save you.
Mhm. And last but not least here, auditing for orphaned resources.
Yeah. So this is a part of the webinar where I say, gee, Stephanie, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a tool that did all of this stuff for us? But I'm not an actor, so I'm not going to try. We do have a tool that does a lot of this stuff for us. So I'll give a quick tour, not a full demo, just a quick tidbit on some of the things we talked about above. But before I do, I want to talk about this last section, orphaned resources. So what we have here, orphaned resources are resources that were once in the environment that no longer are. So we look at network security groups on the top right, orphan network interfaces in the bottom left, public IPs, things that are just sitting idle, orphan disks, big money, could be potentially, right? We can see these are standard SSD. What if they're large? What if they're faster than standard SSD? So a lot of potential savings here, that low hanging fruit where we can just get in, clean it up, of course, confirm that it's not back in the wild, but as the time of scanning, they are not allocated, they're not reserved for a virtual machine that could potentially be powered back on at a later date. These are just sitting idle. So orphan resources, highly recommend looking through the environment, seeing what we can clean up.
Awesome.
And the next one, this is where we'll touch. It's just a pre-recorded session here. This is a live environment. So the a lot of things redacted here, but I just wanted to show on some of the things we talked about earlier today, those top 10s. So if we look at my mouse going frantically left and right here, I'm trying to show here we have compare saving options. We talked about that one. I think that was number two, number three, something like that. And then find better VMs, which is what I'm doing right here. So I selected a virtual machine, one in this client's environment, the SKU on the left-hand side. Now in blue in the middle, that is the actual virtual machine SKU, or multiple. They're running multiple servers on this SKU. It's showing the virtual machine, the vCPUs, the RAM, and the performance score in the 38,000s. And then as we scroll up, we can see all these different virtual machines of same vCPU, of same RAM, similar performance score. And it looks like I found one. I'm dragging my cursor over one that's also in the 38,000. So very similar for a 46% price difference. So what are we losing there? Well, we're going from a V4 to a V5. That's effectively it from what I can see. Or maybe temporary storage, looking at it a little closer, but then the temporary storage one's down below, also 46% discount. So this takes the guesswork out of it. It's incredibly difficult to keep track of all of these virtual machine SKUs. What I'm showing here, same kind of thing. I grabbed a SKU, different SKU, and then I clicked saving plan options. Here's our current cost, pay as you go. Then reserved instance year one, we've reserved for a 3-year savings plan. You can see how it cascades down. And that's what we want. We want those price savings. So again, the tool is doing the guesswork, taking it out for us, giving us recommendations. And now I'm just showing off. I forgot I went to the Insights tab. So these recommendations here is all the recommendations for the whole thing. I want to be specific to cost. That's what this webinar is about. So in the cost section, you can see that the impacted resources, the impacted resources, the top two there are app service reserved instances, right? My first recommendation, the one we started the webinar with. It's not sorted, that's just how they came up, but multiple recommendations specific to your resource based off of all of these cost tips that we were talking about. And then the major FinOps component on the bottom right, potential cost optimizations there, you can see for this client, it's over $800,000. I mean, that's incredible. Everything depends, different sizes, but the point is having a tool to automate this for you, to look in those deep, dark places of Azure, to bring them to your attention so that you can take action. This is how we do it.
Awesome. So thank you, Brandon, for taking us through that. That's pretty cool to see how much easier this process is with our Azure optimization platform. And just to recap, all the strategy we looked at today are things you can investigate and implement on your own. But if you would like to make your cost management journey more effective, more efficient, you can certainly use our Azure optimization dashboard that Brandon was just showing you to help you get there. It checks your environment for each of the items we looked at today and some more, totaling up to about 700 different data points that it checks against for optimization and remediation opportunities across the entire well-architected framework. And you don't have to search between all the different screens and areas in your Azure environment to see all the data, because the dashboard integrates over 15 APIs to pull all of that information into one place, as we just saw, very easy to digest and see all the takeaways. So we're all here trying to reduce our costs in our Azure environment, but don't forget that time is money too. If you want to reduce the amount of time it takes your team to identify, quantify, and prioritize cost optimization actions, then we do encourage you to check out our platform, and you can learn more using this QR code here. That's the same QR code as is on this slide. So I know I didn't give you very long to scan it, but you can still scan it here. We helped one of our customers on this platform save more than $10,000 on their Azure bill after just one scan with them. So feel free to check us out. We'd love to help you get more efficient on your cost management journey. And with that, we've come to the end of our session today, and we do have some time for questions. So we will take a few questions from the Q&A. Before I do that, though, we have another QR code for you here. If you want to download our Azure Cost Management worksheet, it has some more tips, tricks, and details to help you get started on some of the items we covered today and some more. We are also going to send a link to this in the post-event materials along with the slides and the recording. So don't worry about scanning it. You will get the link a little later today, or if you want it ASAP, go ahead and scan. So thank you to everyone in the audience today and to those of you that submitted questions. Let's get into our Q&A here. The first one here, Brandon, how can I provide an accurate budget estimate to my management for things in Azure we would like to trial? It sounds like you covered a little bit of this today, but anything else to share on this?
Yeah, I think Azure Pricing Calculator would probably be my first stop is to get an accurate budget. But I think the key word there is accurate. And in order to get accurate, as I always say, garbage in is garbage out. So if our requirements are coming from a vendor and that vendor is saying that I need 5 servers and they're 2 CPU and 8 gigs of RAM, that's all they're specifying. Well, we don't know. I mean, what version of what generation of CPU? Are we talking like a 4th gen CPU? Are we talking Haswell, Broadwell, Ice Lake? There's so many different things that are left out of that that we got to come back to those requirements and make sure they're accurate to get an accurate output. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is, again, I'm not trying to pick on vendors, but they're notorious for building these reference architectures that are like 10 years old and they don't update them. They're just the 2 and 4, 4 and 8, and it doesn't scale well. And it goes back to our recommendation of right sizing the environment. So then what we do is we deploy based on what they said, just so when they deploy, they can't point the finger at us saying that your infrastructure is not running right. We deploy with what they say, and then we scan it. We scan the environment and then we right size it. But if we can get close to it, I think that's probably my biggest recommendation is to just spend some time in the Azure calculator, spend some time with the vendor too, and just say, hey, do you have a cloud or do you have a little bit more information on the type of processors and the type of throughput and the IOPS you need? I think that would help a lot to get that true final accurate potential cost Azure monthly spend.
Awesome. And another question here, what is the best method to schedule power on if you use scheduled shutdown?
So there's a lot of ways to do it. There's appliances that will, or applications that will do it. There's also functions that will do it. And there are ones in the gallery. I didn't mean to scare people from that. It was odd that we had 2 instances in the past month or two of the same exact script. So however you do it, Azure Automation, there's a lot of different ways. Just make sure that that command gets sent at that management plane layer, that higher layer. So again, whether you get it from the gallery, these were not from the gallery. So in the gallery, those offerings are vetted from Microsoft, maybe not as thorough as they should be, but they are vetted far more than some blog post. So I would recommend that for your own homegrown. Now, remember, there's a lot of other ways to increase. It depends if we're talking containers. It depends if we're talking AVD is a great example, right? Azure Virtual Desktop has this stuff built in. We used to have to turn to third parties for that. Now it's built in. So maybe look to see if it's something that you have available. I always say those native tools, they just work so well together. So go native if we can, then maybe go gallery, then maybe go hunting.
Awesome. And the next question here, what are the error slash accuracy margins in common or recommended cost prediction methods?
Errors. So I think that kind of ties back to that first question is that whole making sure that we have uh, the right requirements out of the gate. Because when we don't, and we realize that maybe we've undersized it, let's go the opposite. I keep saying what we see in the wild is over provision, but let's go the opposite side of it. And let's say that we have undersized the environment because the reference architecture from the vendor was so old or so uh, not accurate. Let's say it that way. So when we deploy something like that, we sometimes see that things double in price because we're doubling our resources. And another trick too that I do, and I go back and forth on this one. I'm going to say it anyways, but when we price out an environment, we often do not include any of the reservations, the savings plans, any of those things that I covered to initially out of the gate save 60 or 90% over that pay-as-you-go price. We will sometimes stay and leave those until we know what the baseline of that is, what the baseline of that application is. So we do this big migration, then we right size the environment, then we lock in the commitments with Microsoft. So I think it's important to do those steps. Now, I understand that sometimes when we're vetting different cloud technologies, or maybe the SaaS provider themselves has their own, or maybe we're still looking to use our on-prem infrastructure. I understand that it's difficult. We want to make it look as cheap as possible, but in the long run, it might not be. So just being cognizant of how we're quoting it out.
Awesome. And another question here, why do Microsoft online cost calculators not reflect the actual TCO? Is this user error here, Brandon? Are there some patterns you've noticed when using it, some pitfalls to avoid to get more accurate answers?
Yeah, so and I think the second link above, when we were talking about the pricing calculator, that TCO calculator will help. I do want to caution though, when we start talking about a true TCO, we're talking about DevOps, security, compliance. We're talking about a lot of monitoring is another one. We're talking about a lot of different things that would be baked into a true total cost of ownership. And the argument also goes both ways because then we start to argue, well, we no longer have to go to the data center. We no longer have to check the blinky lights every week or whenever we were doing it. We no longer, if it's in-house, we no longer have to pay for cooling or power. There's a lot of those intangibles that are tangible that we just don't think about, that we just don't bake into some of our TCO calculations. We think about, well, what all the time savings from my engineers that no longer have to do all of this stuff and the maintenance and the refreshes and now we're switching OpEx to cap or CapEx to OpEx and so there's a lot of things in there that should be accounted for that are not in the Azure pricing calculator. So to help kind of better structure a full TCO is to consider those kind of things. But as I mentioned, the conversation kind of goes back and forth because those things that I mentioned were for Azure. What about the things that are not? Just being completely transparent. Well, now managers have to get their staff up to speed. They know nothing about Azure. So what does that cost look like? And is everything truly taken care of for us in Azure? We never have to touch it again. And the answer is no. We still have to maintain certain things there. So again, back to that TCO, it's a much larger conversation, kind of a war room type boardroom, I should say, be more politically correct. But those kind of things, just to really get them out and see what's most important to you and your organization, and then account for those.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions we have today. If we didn't answer all the questions you have about Azure Cost Management, please feel free to send us an email to this address here, marketing@dataprize.com, and we will get back to you with the answers. I want to close this out here with a thank you to our experts, both Brandon Stewart on the line and Kevin Vieira, who is answering some questions in the chat. So very exciting that we were able to get to all of them today. And just one last thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you each learned something new from today's event, and we will see you on the next one. Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
all. Bye bye.